Pregnant woman gave birth to a crocodile. How is this even possible? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. In a quiet village cradled by swamps and rivers, where mist hung low in the mornings and the croaking of frogs seemed to whisper secrets, the people spoke of the spirits of the river. These were ancient beings, some kind, some cruel, who ruled the waters and answered only those bold enough to call on them. It was said that the river spirits could grant wishes, but they did so with cunning. For every blessing they gave, they took something in return. The village elders warned children never to stray too close to the water after dusk, for the spirits were strongest then, and their curiosity was often dangerous. Despite the warnings, life in the village was simple and peaceful. The people lived off the land, harvesting rice, fishing in the river, and trading handmade goods. At the heart of the village lived Isabella, a woman known for her gentle nature and her kindness to others. She had been married to a fisherman named Matteo for nearly a decade, and though their love was strong, their hearts carried a quiet sorrow. Isabella could not bear children. For years, Isabella had prayed under the banyan tree near the river's edge, asking the heavens for a child. She offered baskets of fruit, lit candles, and sang songs of gratitude, hoping her pleas would be heard. Yet every month brought the same disappointment, and the ache in her heart grew heavier with time. It was on a fateful evening when the sun dipped low and painted the river gold, that Isabella's life began to change. The air was still that night as Isabella sat by the water's edge, her bare feet dipping into the cool river. A woven basket rested beside her, filled with sweet fruits and fragrant flowers, her humble offering to the spirits. The village was quiet behind her, save for the occasional flutter of wings or the chirp of crickets. "Please," Isabella whispered, staring at the river's shimmering surface. "If anyone can hear me, I ask for nothing but a child to love. A child to call my own." Her voice trembled, heavy with years of longing. A soft breeze swept through the reeds, rustling the leaves of the banyan tree behind her. It felt as though the river itself were listening, holding its breath to hear her words. Just as Isabella rose to leave, something strange happened. The wind died completely, and the air turned thick and heavy, as though the world had frozen around her. The river, once calm and still, rippled suddenly, its dark surface swirling as though something moved beneath it. Isabella froze, her breath caught in her throat as she watched the water churn. A faint sound reached her ears, a low melodic hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was beautiful yet haunting, a song that tugged at her heart and filled her with an unfamiliar sense of unease. Then the water stilled and silence fell once more. Isabella blinked, her heart racing. She looked around nervously, half expecting someone to appear from the shadows, but she was alone. Shaking off the unease, she whispered a final prayer and turned to leave, her offering resting beneath the banyan tree. That night, Isabella dreamed of the river. In her dream, the water stretched endlessly before her, shimmering like glass beneath a sky that pulsed with strange, silver light. She stood on the shore, her feet sinking into soft, wet sand as a figure emerged from the water. It was neither man nor woman but something otherworldly, a spirit of the river, draped in robes of mist and crowned with reeds. Its eyes glowed a pale green, and its voice echoed like the rush of distant waves. "You have asked for a child," the spirit said, its voice weaving into her mind like silk. "And so you shall have one." Isabella felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with relief. "But know this," the spirit continued, its gaze locking onto hers. "All gifts come with a price." Before Isabella could respond, the spirit raised its arm, and the river surged forward like a living thing, swallowing her whole. She awoke with a gasp, her body drenched in sweat and her breath coming in shallow bursts. The dream had felt so real, its echoes still lingering in her mind. She sat up in bed, clutching her chest as Matteo stirred beside her. "Isabella?" he mumbled sleepily, reaching for her hand. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she whispered, though her heart pounded in her ears. It was just a dream. But deep down, Isabella knew it was more than that. In the weeks that followed, Isabella began to change. At first it was subtle. She grew tired more easily, her appetite dwindling as a strange nausea settled over her. Then came the cravings, an insatiable hunger for fish and river plants, things she had never desired before. Matteo teased her lovingly about it, but Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was happening to her. Soon the whispers began. "Isabella looks pale," the villagers murmured as they passed her on the road. "Do you think she's ill?" "She hasn't been herself lately," others added. "Something is strange about her." But everything came to light one morning when Isabella woke to find her belly swollen, a round, firm shape that had appeared seemingly overnight. She cried out in shock, startling Matteo awake. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Look," Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her face. She lifted her nightgown, revealing the undeniable curve of her abdomen. "Matteo, I think I'm pregnant." Matteo stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Pregnant? But how?" the midwife said. "I don't know," Isabella interrupted, her voice trembling. "I don't understand it either." Matteo knelt beside her, placing his hand gently on her belly. "It doesn't matter how," he said softly, his voice filled with awe. "It's a miracle." Isabella nodded, though her heart remained heavy with doubt. The spirit's warning echoed in her mind, "All gifts come with a price." The pregnancy progressed quickly, far faster than any the village midwives had ever seen. Within weeks, Isabella's belly grew to a size that seemed impossible, her movements becoming slow and laborious. She could feel the baby, whatever it was, shifting and writhing inside her, movements that felt strange and unnatural. At night, she dreamed of the river again. She saw the same spirit, its glowing eyes watching her from the water's edge. She heard the hum of its song, a sound both beautiful and terrifying, pulling her deeper into the dream until she woke gasping for breath. The villagers' whispers grew louder as Isabella's condition became impossible to ignore. "It's not natural," they said, their voices tinged with fear. "No woman grows so quickly. What is she carrying?" "She went to the river," others added darkly. "She prayed to the spirits. And now she's paying the price." Matteo did his best to shield Isabella from the rumors, but even he could not deny that something about the pregnancy was strange. He watched helplessly as his wife grew weaker, the weight of her swollen belly leaving her bedridden and breathless. "We need to call the midwife," Matteo said one evening, kneeling beside her. "You're too weak, Isabella." Isabella shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No midwife can help me now." "What are you saying?" Matteo demanded, his voice breaking. Isabella looked at him, tears pooling in her eyes. "This child, it's not like any other. I don't know what I've brought into this world, Matteo." Matteo's face paled, but he took her hand in his. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." That night a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the village, rattling windows and sending shutters slamming against the walls. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud. Inside their small home, Isabella's cries of labor rose above the storm, echoing through the walls like a song of pain and fear. Matteo hovered at her side, holding her hand as she writhed on the bed. "You're strong, Isabella," he murmured. "You can do this." But deep down he was terrified. The midwife had been called, but she hadn't arrived. Outside, the river roared louder than ever, as though it had come alive. Matteo could feel the house trembling beneath his feet, as though the water itself were calling for Isabella. And then, in a moment of stillness, when the storm seemed to hold its breath, Isabella let out a final cry. Matteo froze. The room fell silent, save for the soft patter of rain against the roof. Then, from the foot of the bed, a sound broke through the quiet. A low guttural hiss. Matteo turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. And there, lying in the folds of the soaked blankets, was a creature that should not have existed. Its skin glistened like wet stone, its eyes bright and green as it blinked up. Matteo could not move. He could not breathe. The creature lay still on the soaked bed, its small body curled tightly as if resting after the effort of birth. Its slick, green skin reflected the faint candlelight, and when it blinked, the unnatural intelligence in its gaze sent a chill down Matteo's spine. The hiss had been unmistakable. It was not the sound of a human child's cry but something altogether different. Something ancient and wild. Isabella lay back on the bed, her chest rising and falling weakly as her strength ebbed away. She turned her head slightly, her gaze falling on the creature at her feet. Her face paled further, her lips trembling as she whispered, What have I done?" Matteo's hands trembled as he stepped closer, his instincts torn between fear and protection. "Isabella, is it alive?" At the sound of his voice, the creature shifted, its small tail twitching as it uncurled itself. Slowly, impossibly, it raised its head. Its snout was short, its teeth tiny but sharp, glistening as its mouth parted slightly. And then it looked directly at Matteo. Matteo staggered back, his heart pounding in his chest. "It's a crocodile," he breathed. "Isabella, it's a—" "No," Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's my child." The words hung heavy in the air. By morning the storm had passed, leaving behind swollen rivers and a heavy, suffocating silence in the village. Word had spread quickly about the night's events, rumors carried by the howling wind, fueled by fear and superstition. "It's true," one villager whispered. "I saw Matteo running through the storm calling for help. They say Isabella gave birth to a monster." "Not a monster," another added grimly. "A crocodile. It's the spirit's doing. She went to the river and asked for a child. Now they've cursed her." The whispers grew louder with every passing hour, until the entire village buzzed with stories of curses, river spirits, and Isabella's strange child. The once quiet village, where life had moved at the gentle pace of the seasons, was now a place of unease. People avoided the Lopez house, their gazes flickering nervously toward its shuttered windows, as though the creature inside could see them through the walls. Inside, the house was silent. Isabella sat in the corner of her bedroom, cradling the small crocodile in her arms. It had been cleaned and swaddled in a blanket, its sharp teeth and scaled skin incongruous against the soft fabric. Despite its nature, the creature was quiet, its breathing steady as it lay still, almost content. "It's not a monster," Isabella whispered softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It's my child." Matteo stood near the window, his back turned to her. He stared out at the village, watching as people gathered in small groups, their gestures animated as they spoke. He knew what they were saying. He could almost hear the accusations already, the whispers of curses, of unnatural things that had no place in their world. "We can't keep it, Isabella," Matteo said finally, his voice low. Isabella looked up sharply, her arms tightening around the swaddled creature. "What are you saying?" "It's not right," Matteo said, turning to face her. His expression was pained, torn between love for his wife and fear of what had happened. "Whatever that thing is, it doesn't belong here." "It's ours," Isabella snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "You don't understand. I felt it growing inside me. I carried it. I gave birth to it. It's part of me." Matteo ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room like a man searching for answers that would not come. "Isabella, listen to yourself. It's a crocodile. People are afraid. I'm afraid. We don't know what it is or what it will become." Isabella looked down at the creature in her arms. Its bright green eyes blinked up at her, and for a moment she felt as though it understood her, truly understood her. "It's not a curse," she whispered. "It's a gift. The river spirits gave it to us. Maybe it's not what we expected, but it's ours, Matteo. You can't ask me to give it up." Matteo's shoulders slumped, his resolve faltering. He loved Isabella more than anything, but this was beyond his understanding. Finally he spoke softly, his voice barely audible. "If we keep it, Isabella, the village will never accept it. Or us." Days passed, and the village's whispers turned to shouts. People demanded to see the creature for themselves, their fear feeding the fire of superstition. "Bring it out," they cried, gathering outside the Lopez house with torches in hand. "Show us what you've brought into this world." Matteo stood at the door, barring their way, his face pale but determined. "Leave us alone," he shouted. "This is our home." "Your wife brought a curse upon us," one man yelled. "The storms, the floods, it's her doing. The river spirits are angry, and that thing is proof." Inside, Isabella sat on the floor, rocking the small crocodile gently as it slept. Her heart ached as she listened to the voices outside, their words laced with fear and anger. She knew the villagers wouldn't stop. Their fear of the unknown had taken root, and soon it would consume everything. "Isabella," Matteo said, stepping into the room. His voice was quiet, his expression hollow. "We can't stay here. It's not safe." Isabella looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "Where will we go?" "To the river," Matteo replied softly. "To the place where it all began. Maybe the spirits will give us answers. Or maybe—" He hesitated, unable to finish the thought. Isabella nodded, her gaze falling on the creature in her arms. It stirred slightly, letting out a soft hiss that sounded almost like a sigh. She pressed a kiss to its head, her tears falling freely now. "We'll protect you," she whispered. "No matter what." That night, under the cover of darkness, Isabella and Matteo left the village. The stars above were hidden by thick clouds, and the sound of the river echoed through the stillness like a song. Isabella carried the small crocodile wrapped tightly in a blanket, her footsteps careful as they made their way to the water's edge. The river looked different at night, vast and endless, its surface dark and glassy beneath the faint glow of the moon. Isabella shivered as she stepped closer, memories of her dream flooding her mind. "Are you sure about this?" Matteo asked, his voice low. Isabella nodded. "I need to understand, Matteo. I need to know why this happened. She knelt by the water, cradling the creature in her arms. Its green eyes blinked open, watching her silently. For a moment, Isabella hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. And then she whispered, "Please? I know you're listening. Tell me what I must do." The air grew heavy, just as it had on the night she prayed for a child. The water rippled, its surface churning as though something moved beneath it. Matteo stepped back, his breath caught in his throat, but Isabella stayed where she was, her gaze fixed on the river. A low hum began to rise from the water, a sound that sent chills down their spines. It was the same song Isabella had heard in her dreams, beautiful and terrible all at once. The water surged forward, lapping at Isabella's feet, and then it happened. A figure began to rise from the depths of the river. It was the spirit from her dream, tall and otherworldly, its body draped in mist and its glowing eyes fixed on Isabella. The air crackled with energy as the spirit spoke, its voice echoing like the rush of waves. "You came seeking answers," it said. "And answers you shall have." Isabella held the crocodile tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you give him to me?" she asked. "What is he?" The spirit tilted its head, its gaze unreadable. "He is both gift and test. You asked for a child and the river answered. But all gifts come with a price. Will you love him as he is, or will you cast him away as others would?" Isabella's heart ached as she looked down at the creature in her arms. Its eyes blinked up at her and she knew her answer. "I will love him," she whispered. "No matter what." The spirit's form began to dissolve, its voice fading into the night. "Then you have passed the test, mother of the river's child. He will bring balance where there is fear and protection where there is doubt. Care for him and he will care for you." The water stilled once more and the spirit was gone. Matteo stepped forward, his hands trembling. "What does it mean?" Isabella looked up at him, her expression calm. Isabella looked up at Matteo, her expression calm yet resolute, as though the spirit's words had settled something deep within her. "It means he is ours," she whispered, holding the small crocodile close to her chest. "Not a curse. Not a monster. A gift from the river itself." Matteo stared at her, torn between disbelief and awe. The spirit's voice still echoed in his mind, its power undeniable, its message clear. He took a shaky breath and knelt beside Isabella, looking down at the creature cradled in her arms. The crocodile blinked slowly, its bright green eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. It made no move to lash out, no hiss of warning. Instead, it seemed to study Matteo as though it understood more than it should. "Can you really love it?" Matteo asked softly, his voice raw with emotion. Isabella turned her gaze to him, her eyes brimming with tears. "How could I not? I prayed for a child, Matteo. And here he is, alive, breathing. He's different, yes, but he's mine. Ours." Matteo swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing into him. He had seen enough that night to know this was no ordinary creature. It was something otherworldly, something born of the river's ancient power. To reject it would be to reject the spirit's gift, a price he dared not pay. "I'll stand by you, Isabella," he said at last, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "No matter what comes, we'll protect him. Together." Isabella smiled faintly, relief softening the lines of her face. "Thank you." Matteo wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close as they sat on the riverbank, the sound of the water gently lapping at their feet. The creature, small yet impossibly strong, rested quietly in Isabella's arms, its eyes drifting shut as though it too had found peace. But as the moon rose higher in the sky, a distant sound broke the stillness. The voices carried through the dark, growing louder with every passing moment. Isabella and Matteo turned sharply toward the direction of the village, their eyes widening as they saw the flickering glow of torches weaving through the trees. "They've come," Matteo said in a low, urgent voice. "They're coming for us." Isabella's heart pounded in her chest. "We have to go. Now." Matteo helped her to her feet, steadying her as she clutched the swaddled crocodile tightly to her chest. Together, they moved quickly along the riverbank, the muddy ground squelching beneath their feet. The torches drew closer, accompanied by angry shouts and the snap of branches as the villagers made their way toward them. "She's at the river," someone cried. "They're trying to escape." "Bring them out," another voice roared. "The curse must be broken." Fear coursed through Isabella, but she didn't stop. She held the creature close, whispering softly to him as though to soothe them both. "It's going to be okay, my love. I promise." Matteo looked back over his shoulder, his face grim. "We can't outrun them, Isabella. They'll catch up to us." "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mateo hesitated for only a moment before his gaze fell on the river. "The water," he said. "We have to go into the water." Isabella stared at him, her eyes wide. "But the current, it's too strong." "It's our only chance," Mateo insisted. "The spirit gave him to us. Maybe the river will protect us." Before Isabella could argue, Mateo took her hand, guiding her carefully into the shallows. The icy water swirled around their ankles, then their knees as they waded deeper into the river. The crocodile stirred slightly in Isabella's arms, as though sensing the pull of the water around him. The villagers burst onto the riverbank just as the water reached Mateo's waist. They shouted angrily, their torches casting eerie shadows across the dark surface of the river. "There they are," one man yelled. "Stop them." "Throw the creature in the fire," another cried. Isabella's heart raced as she clung to Mateo, the water now up to her chest. The villagers surged forward, but just as they reached the edge of the river, something happened. The air grew heavy, the same way it had on the night Isabella prayed to the river spirits. The water rippled and churned, swirling around Isabella and Mateo in powerful currents. The villagers froze, their shouts faltering as a low hum rose from the depths of the river. The crocodile's eyes snapped open, glowing brighter than before. It let out a soft hiss, and the water surged upward, forming waves that rose unnaturally high around them. "The spirits," someone gasped. "They're angry. Stay back." The villagers stumbled backward as the river came alive, its dark surface writhing like a living thing. A figure began to rise from the water, the same spirit Isabella had seen in her dreams. Its robes of mist swirled around it, its green eyes glowing as it towered above the riverbank. "You have sought to harm what is not yours," the spirit's voice echoed, its tone both beautiful and terrifying. "The child of the river is under our protection." The villagers cowered, their torches sputtering and falling to the ground. Some turned and fled into the trees, their shouts of anger replaced with cries of fear. The spirit extended an arm, and the waves surged forward, swallowing the torches and dousing their flames. Isabella clung tightly to Mateo as the spirit turned its gaze toward them. "You have accepted the child," the spirit said, its voice softening. "And so the river accepts you. Go now and protect him. He will grow to be the balance between our world and yours." The water began to calm, the waves settling back into ripples. The spirit's form began to dissolve once more, its voice fading into the night. "Raise him with love and he will bring peace." Isabella looked down at the crocodile in her arms. Its bright eyes stared back at her, full of knowing, as though it understood everything that had happened. She nodded, her heart swelling with resolve. "We will protect him," she whispered. "No matter what." The villagers spoke of that night for generations to come. They whispered of the storm, the spirit, and the child born of the river. Some claimed it was a curse, a warning never to interfere with forces they could not understand. Others believed it was a blessing, a reminder of the river's power and the balance it brought to their world. Isabella and Mateo left the village soon after, choosing to live in a small cottage deep in the marshlands, where the river wound like a silver ribbon through the trees. There, in the heart of the wild, they raised the crocodile child as their own. The creature grew quickly, its small frame developing into a powerful, graceful body. It swam through the river with ease, its scales glimmering like jewels in the sunlight. But despite its strength and otherworldly nature, it remained gentle with Isabella, nuzzling against her hand as she fed it and hissing softly whenever she sang to it by the water's edge. The bond between them was unshakable, a love forged in the depths of mystery and sacrifice. Years passed and the crocodile became a legend of its own. Fishermen spoke of seeing it glide silently through the water, its green eyes watching from the depths. Yet no harm ever came to those who respected the river, and many began to believe the creature was a guardian, a protector of the waters and all who lived near them. Isabella grew old, her hair turning silver as time passed, but the bond with her child never wavered. On quiet evenings, she would sit by the river, watching as the crocodile surfaced to greet her, its presence a comforting reminder of the spirit's promise. And when Isabella's time finally came, it was said that the crocodile carried her body gently into the river, where the water embraced her and took her home. To this day, the villagers tell her story. They call it the legend of the crocodile child, a tale of love, sacrifice, and the delicate balance between man and nature. They say that on quiet nights, if you stand by the river and listen closely, you can hear the hum of the spirit's song and see the glowing green eyes of the guardian watching over the water. And if you dare to ask for a blessing, remember the spirit's warning. All gifts come with a price. Years passed and the world outside the marshlands began to change. The quiet village where Isabella had once lived grew busier, roads paved with stone, markets bustling with traders, and the forest thinned to make way for fields. But the river remained unchanged. It flowed endlessly, winding through the marshes like a living thing, carrying whispers of the past on its surface. Among the villagers, Isabella's story became a tale told to children at twilight. Mothers would gather their little ones around the fire and warn them never to disrespect the river or its spirits. Long ago, they would say, a woman prayed for a child. The river answered her, but the gift came with a price. She bore a crocodile, a child born of both worlds, who grew to guard the waters and protect those who honored them. Some children would gasp in awe, others would look out nervously toward the river, afraid of what might lurk beneath its still surface. To the younger generation, the tale was nothing more than a story, a warning of the power the river held, real or imagined. But to the older villagers, those who remembered Isabella's kindness and Mateo's quiet resolve, the story was true. They had seen the torches that night. They had felt the ground tremble and heard the spirit's voice rise from the water like a song. And though they had once feared what Isabella had brought into the world, over time, they began to understand. The crocodile had not been a curse. It had been a guardian. The marshlands where Isabella and Mateo had built their home remained untouched. Those who ventured close to the river spoke of strange happenings. Ripples in the water when no wind stirred, glimpses of scales glinting like emeralds just beneath the surface, and eyes glowing faintly in the twilight. But no harm ever came to those who approached the water with respect. Fishermen who worked along the river would leave small offerings of fish or flowers at its edge, muttering words of gratitude. They believed that the crocodile child still watched over the waters, ensuring the river remained a place of life and balance. It's just an old tale, the skeptics would scoff, shaking their heads. There's no such thing as spirits or crocodile children. But the fishermen would only smile, their eyes crinkling with secrets. Believe what you will, they'd reply. But be careful by the river. It's older than any of us and it remembers. One day, decades after Isabella's passing, a young boy named Tomas wandered into the marshes. He had always been curious about the river, drawn to it in a way he couldn't explain. His mother had warned him not to go too close, but the stories had only deepened his fascination. Be careful near the water, she had told him sternly. It's not just a river, Tomas. It's alive. But curiosity, as it often does, outweighed caution. Tomas slipped away one afternoon, weaving through the tall reeds until he reached the water's edge. The river was calm that day, its surface so smooth it looked like glass. Sunlight danced on its surface, reflecting off the ripples that spread lazily across the water. Tomas knelt down, peering into the depths. Are you really there? He whispered as though speaking to someone just out of sight. Is the story true? For a long moment, nothing happened. The only sound was the chirping of insects and the distant croaking of frogs. Tomas began to think he had been foolish to come, until the water stirred. His breath caught as he watched the ripples form, spreading outward like rings on a drum. Then, slowly, a shape began to emerge. First, it was just a shadow, dark and long, moving with slow purpose beneath the water. Then the sunlight caught it and Tomas gasped. Scales. Green and gleaming like polished stone. The crocodile broke the surface, its powerful body rising just enough for Tomas to see its head. Its eyes, bright and green, glowing faintly, stared directly into his own. Tomas froze. The crocodile didn't hiss or move aggressively. It simply watched him, its gaze heavy with meaning as though it could see into his very soul. For a moment, Tomas forgot to breathe. You're real, he whispered. The crocodile blinked, and Tomas felt an odd sense of calm wash over him. He understood, somehow, that it meant him no harm. The creature dipped its head slightly, a motion that felt almost like a nod, before sinking back beneath the water. The ripples faded, and the river was calm once more. Tomas stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where the crocodile had disappeared. When he finally turned to leave, his heart felt full, as though he had been given a secret to carry. Tomas returned to the village that evening, his face flushed with excitement. I saw him, he cried, bursting into his home. I saw the crocodile from the story. The one Isabella. Hush. His mother scolded, though her eyes widened in alarm. What were you doing near the river? Didn't I tell you? But it's true. Tomas insisted. It's real. And it's not a monster. It's watching over us. His mother stared at him for a long moment, her expression softening as memories of the old tales stirred in her mind. Finally, she knelt beside Tomas, cupping his face gently in her hands. The river gives and the river takes, she said softly. Remember that, Tomas. Always honor it and it will honor you in return." Tomas nodded solemnly, understanding now what the village elders had meant all along. The river was not something to be feared, it was something to be respected. The story of the crocodile child continued to live on, passed down from parent to child, from elder to youth. Some told it as a warning, a tale of spirits and curses. Others told it as a story of love, a mother's unwavering devotion to a child born of both worlds. And those who visited the river on quiet nights claimed they could still see it, the guardian of the waters gliding silently beneath the surface, its green eyes glowing softly in the dark. They say that if you listen carefully, you can hear the hum of the spirit's song, carried on the breeze like a whispered promise. And if you dare to approach the water with a pure heart, the crocodile might appear, watching you with eyes that hold the wisdom of the river itself. For the river, as the villagers knew, was alive. And it never forgot. To this day the marshlands remain untouched, a place of mystery and wonder. The river winds through the land like an eternal lifeline, its waters teeming with secrets. Fishermen still leave offerings at its edge, flowers, fish, or whispered prayers, honoring the guardian they believe watches over them. The tale of Isabella and her crocodile child has become a part of the village's identity, woven into their songs, their art, and their dreams. Some call it a legend. Others call it the truth. And in the stillness of the marsh, where the water meets the reeds, the crocodile's eyes still glow, a silent reminder of the balance between man and the spirit world. For all gifts come with a price. And love, as Isabella knew, can take many forms. Generations came and went, but the story of Isabella and her crocodile child became more than a tale. It grew into a legend that shaped the very identity of the village. Travelers, scholars, and storytellers from distant lands came to the marshlands to hear the tale firsthand. Some came seeking truth, others came in search of magic, and a few hoped to see the mythical guardian with their own eyes. The village itself changed, yet the river remained untouched. No bridge was ever built to cross it, and no fisherman dared to dredge its depths. It was sacred, a place of reverence where nature and spirits intertwined. Offerings were now a ritual, beautiful wreaths of flowers, clay figures of crocodiles painted in green and gold, and small fish left on woven mats at the river's edge. People spoke of the river not with fear but with respect, as though it were a living being with a soul older than time itself. Parents taught their children to honor it, to never mock the water, and to leave their gifts as tokens of gratitude. "Do not take more than the river gives," the elders warned. For the river never forgets. And still, on moonlit nights, people swore they saw it, the crocodile gliding silently across the water, its green eyes glowing softly in the dark, a guardian watching over the marshlands. Years later, in a world much changed, a young woman named Alina returned to the village. She had grown up hearing the story of Isabella and the crocodile child from her grandmother, who spoke of it as though it were history rather than folklore. Alina had always been fascinated by the tale, its beauty, its mystery, but life had taken her far from the marshes into cities of stone and metal. But when her grandmother passed away, leaving Alina her journals and a small silver locket shaped like a crocodile, she felt the pull of her roots. The locket had been passed down for generations, its origins tied to the river and Isabella's legacy. "There is something waiting for you there," her grandmother had whispered on her deathbed. "Go to the river. It remembers you." And so Alina returned, her heart heavy with grief but alive with curiosity. She found the village changed, modernized but still holding on to its soul. The marshes, however, were untouched, timeless, as though they existed outside of reality. The villagers welcomed her warmly, recognizing her family name. "You are Isabella's blood," they said softly, as though speaking her name might stir the very waters. On her first evening, Alina walked to the river, the silver locket clutched tightly in her hand. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and wildflowers, the sound of the water humming softly like a lullaby. She knelt by the river's edge, her heart racing as she whispered, "Isabella, are you still here?" For a long moment there was nothing. The river was still, its surface reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. But just as Alina began to turn away, the water rippled. She froze. Slowly, impossibly, a shape emerged from the depths. It moved with purpose and grace, its scales catching the fading light like shards of emerald. Alina's breath caught as the creature broke the surface, its head rising above the waterline. It was the crocodile, massive now, powerful yet calm. Its green eyes, impossibly wise, stared directly into hers. It was as though time had not touched it, as though it had waited for this moment. Alina felt tears slip down her cheeks as she clutched the locket tighter. "You're real," she whispered. "The story is real." The crocodile blinked, its gaze unwavering, and for a brief moment, Alina swore she heard something, an echo of a voice, soft and melodic, rising from the water. "Protect what is sacred. Honor what is given. The river remembers." The crocodile dipped its head gently, a motion that felt like an acknowledgement, a greeting passed down through generations. And then, with the same quiet grace, it slipped back beneath the water, disappearing into the depths. Alina stayed by the river until night fell, her mind swirling with emotions she couldn't name. She understood now what her grandmother had meant. The river was not just a place, it was alive, and its stories were etched into the very land. Isabella's love, her sacrifice, and her bond with the crocodile child had left a mark that time could not erase. Alina stayed in the village after that night, choosing to reclaim the life her ancestors had built. She became the village storyteller, weaving the tale of Isabella and the crocodile child into her own words. Children would gather at her feet, wide-eyed as they listened to the story of the river's gift and the woman who had loved what others feared. "Did the crocodile ever leave?" they would ask. Alina would smile softly, her gaze drifting toward the marshes. "No. It's still here, watching over the river and all who honor it." Some nights, Alina would walk to the river, just as Isabella had done so many years before. She would kneel by the water's edge, the silver locket resting against her chest, and leave small offerings, flowers, fish, or whispered words of gratitude. And every now and then she would see it, the guardian of the river, its scales gleaming like jewels beneath the moonlight, its eyes glowing softly as it watched her from the shadows. To Alina, the crocodile was not a creature to be feared. It was a reminder, a symbol of love, balance, and the ancient bond between man and nature. The story of the crocodile child became more than legend. It became a legacy. It taught the villagers to respect what they could not understand, to care for the river and the land it nourished, and to cherish the balance between worlds. Fishermen continued to leave offerings at the river's edge. Children played along its banks, but only under the watchful eyes of their elders. And those who dared to listen closely at twilight swore they could still hear it, the hum of a song rising from the water, the voice of the spirit carrying on the breeze. The crocodile became part of the river itself, inseparable from its currents, its story flowing endlessly like the water it guarded. To those who honored the legend, it was clear: the river remembers, and so too would they. Many years later, long after Alina had passed the story to a new generation, travelers came to the village in search of the famed river. They spoke of its beauty, its mystery, and the ancient tale of the crocodile child. Some dismissed it as a myth, while others marveled at its power. But those who dared to approach the marshlands with respect, those who left flowers or whispered thanks, returned with stories of their own. "The water rippled," they would say. "And for just a moment, I saw it, green eyes watching me like the river itself had come alive." The villagers would smile knowingly, their voices soft as they replied, "It's the guardian of the waters. The river's gift, born of love and sacrifice." And as the travelers left, the river flowed on, eternal, mysterious, and alive. Because the river, as all in the village knew, never forgot.